Good afternoon. Kathleen Ennis-Durstine here, manager of Chaplaincy Services at Children's National Hospital. We feel in Chaplaincy Services that one of our charges to the organization is the wellness of that entire organization. And that means spiritual, religious, but also psychosocial and emotional. And part of that for me means lifting up the programs and the people who do the hard work of caring for our patients and our families. So I am here today with Darcel Jackson, who has a long history with Children's, and I'm going to let her introduce herself to you and tell you a little bit about that history. Darcel, welcome.
Thank you for having me. My name is Darcel Jackson, and I wear several different hats here at Children's. First and foremost, I am the parent of a medically complex child, and she's received care here since birth, so that's been 16 years. And being her mom led me to wanting to give back to Children's, and thus I became a volunteer on our Patient and Family Advisory Council, which then led to my employment here. And so I've been an employee at Children's now for 9 years, currently serving as Patient and Family Coordinator on our Patient and Family Experience team.
Right. And you also serve as co-chair of one of the subcommittees or committees on our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative. Tell us a little bit about that and how it sort of came into being and how you got your role there.
Yeah, absolutely. So the committee that I co-chair, the subcommittee, is our Patient, Family, and Community Engagement subcommittee, and I share the co-chair role with Desiree Delatorre. And really, this committee started probably 2 years ago. I want to say 2020. I don't have the exact month in my head at the moment, but it really started at a time where we had been doing some diversity work within Children's. A lot of that, I think, was more with faculty and recruitment for our physicians and doctors and residents. But I think in 2020 we had a convergence of a lot of things just going on in the United States. So we had COVID. Yeah. That started, and with COVID, there became a really remarkable opportunity for people to observe and notice just the disparities in how COVID, who was getting impacted and affected by COVID, what that looked like with schools being closed and language barriers, and you go down the line with immunization. So that was a glaring look, I think, on just in the United States, some of the issues regarding diversity, equity, inclusion. And then we also had, in that same year, the murder of George Floyd. And I think it was a convergence of people being home and being kind of isolated and on these stay-at-home orders, and the murder of George Floyd, that I think there was a bigger attention to what some of us, me being a Black woman, have seen and have known. But I think it was just people couldn't avoid it. And so I think that really sparked, I think, some momentum because people were home and here, and then we had the protests, et cetera. And I think at that point, we had Dr. Cora Bramble start some diversity dialogues here within Children's. And our president and CEO, Dr. Newman, put out a statement in support of Black lives. And at that point, I think that was the real push to really do some more diverse DEI work within Children's National. And thus a steering committee was formed, and then 8 or 9 subcommittees, the one that I mentioned being one. There's an LGBTQ plus subcommittee, as well as a curriculum and development committee that's really working on the work in education and curriculum for us as staff to improve our DEI work. And there's a faculty committee. So if we look on our intranet site, if that's for who have access, they'll be to learn more about the really broader committees that are doing some really great work in the institution.
Thank you. I don't think I was even really aware of how many subcommittees there were under this steering committee.
Yeah.
That's really good to know.
And I wish I can have them all in my head, but there's one that HR is working with our non clinicians, where they're working on that kind of career and professional development for non clinicians. There's a mentorship lattice for those who are physicians and clinicians on kind of that to get promoted and to move up. So there's a lot of work. There's our community and communications and marketing. That's kind of that outward communication, really taking a look of that from a DEI perspective. And then additional to that, we now have DEI as part of our corporate goals. So in addition to some of this work, there's also corporate goals around identifying inequities and solutions.
Can I ask you a little bit about your background? You are so involved and so passionate about so many of these things, and you seem to have such a deep knowledge in so many areas. What is your background?
Probably, I wish I could say what my background was. I don't think anything in my background necessarily prepared me for what I'm doing today, except for my daughter. And that's just that's just the truth of the matter. Is that I worked in marketing prior to coming to Children's, and then I also did office administration work prior to coming to Children's. But everything that I was passionate about changed when I had Anaya.
Okay.
And so when I came here, it really, in my mind, it opened me up to a world, just even from a DEI perspective, that I didn't see before when we're thinking about those who are physically disabled. I knew what it was to be a Black woman, but I didn't know what it was to be a disabled person. And so now having a child who's in a wheelchair, non-ambulatory, visually impaired, hearing impairment, it really opened my eyes to what did not work well for her in the world.
Okay.
And wanting to change that for all, which I think has sparked my interest in this work. It's not just, and that's the great thing about diversity, is it's not just one area. You know, in diversity, equity, inclusion, we're thinking about racial, religious, ethnic, language, health literacy, social, economic, physical disabilities. So there's so much rich work that can be done, and work that will probably never end.
Yeah.
And that's what I like about it, is how do we build, for me as a parent, but also as a member of Children's and this healthcare team, is how do we build a better community and environment for every single person that enters the building?
Absolutely. Do you ever get frustrated?
Always.
Always.
Always. Because, there's some things that we can control as an individual, some things we can control as an organization, but there's so much that we cannot control. There's so much we still have to learn, and it's always changing. But I guess that's what it's about. How do we learn and grow from one another? How do we have these important conversations so we can learn to be better humans for others, but also for ourselves?
That is so profound and so absolutely true. Knowing ourselves better only gives us the opportunity to make space and room to honor others in the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Darcel, what are some of the challenges that Children's faces in the community? And then I'm going to ask you the opposite side of that question in a minute.
Yeah. So I think when I think about some of the work we've been thinking about with DEI, specifically with having equity, is we have this history in this country, therefore the people aren't trusting. And so it's hard sometimes, especially, and COVID is a good example of this. We have COVID and we have immunizations, but do people trust that? Do people trust that it's safe to get immunized? Because we have a history of Tuskegee and other examples where we were trusting, and it was to experiment on us unknowingly with, so I think those are some of the barriers. And so what I think we can do, and I hope we do better, is to not just be responsive to what's needed at the moment. So now we have this vaccine, we want to encourage people to come in, but to establish and foster those relationships comes well before now. So this is an ongoing work of how do we build trusting, bilateral communication with our community, so that they see us as a partner, they see us as a leader. So when these things happen, it's not, oh, you're only coming out to me now. It's, we've already established that relationship. And so I think those are things that, not just Children's, but healthcare in general, we really need to, one, make sure that we always are doing that, so that we they know we're genuine. I also think that we also need to be mindful of who is our community. And so making sure that all these conversations, in this, we talk about immigrants and language, but that's important, is that we need to make sure that we're communicating with our community in the way that they can understand,
Mm-hmm.
and in order to really have that, get that good feedback and to really develop that strong relationship.
Great. So what I'm hearing you say is part of that is developing the trust. Much of that is developing the trust. And in order to do that, we need to behave in certain ways to engender that trust and allow people to come to us in that manner. What do we face in terms of sort of internal struggles around building the kind of things we want to build to offer from children?
So I think it's a couple of things. I think we're getting there, but I think we can't assume what people in our community want. We have to ask them. So I think even when we think about research, I'm not a researcher, so I don't often know, but are we reaching out to our community to develop research projects that are in line with what the community needs and wants? We may know what we want, but what do they want? And so are we going to be able to recruit individuals for, say, that research if it's not important to them, it's not valuable to them? So I think and that's an extension of what we need. We need to find out, what does our community need? What do they want from us?
Right.
And we need to listen. It's trusting them to tell us, trusting what they say, trusting that if they say something works well, doesn't work well, that is their experience, that is their perspective, and then figuring out how do we make it work from there.
Thank you. You mentioned a few moments ago that there were some real triggers to some of this work that happened with the tragedy of George Floyd's murder and other shootings around the country around that same time, and just sort of the whole climate of the society. And there was a great momentum. Is that momentum still there?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think one of the great things that happened at that time was COVID, and was that people were not going to work. They were working from home. Schools were down. So people were glued to social media. People were glued to the television, and they had time. As the world starts opening up, I don't think people have the same time and drive to focus on these. But I also think we are so flooded with things, so flooded through media, social media and television and radio with so much information. There's always going to be something new, and now with so many things else going on, with the war in Ukraine and with the economy, I think for those who it's important to, I think that fight goes on, but I don't know if we still have the same momentum. In all honesty, and I think on the other side of that is it's also political. And so, if it's not something that is highly favored to talk about, or may receive criticism, or it just, can we avoid it? And then there's also a group of people that don't believe that it's a real issue.
Yeah.
And so if it's not believed to be a real issue at this particular point, it's not going to hold the same momentum. But I don't let that discourage, because I think it doesn't need to be this bubble that we had for us to do good work. It just means we need to remain steadfast that this is good work that we want to do.
Okay. I know that at that time that momentum was so powerful in this country and maybe around the world, it became really important to me to learn where I was and where I stood, and who I had become or was created to be by a societal system as a white woman, and began reading many things written both by people of color and people who identify as white, and certainly had this experience of like, why didn't I know that? And realizing there was so much I was never taught, and then realizing why I wasn't taught it. So it's important to me to still grow and learn from that. So if you are willing, I would like to ask you, as a Black woman speaking to me as a white woman, what is it that you want me to know and understand? What are the biases of white society that you feel I should be attuned to?
Mm-hmm. So thank you, because I think that's a tough question to ask. So I think the first thing is that for most white people, I believe, probably navigate this world really not having to pay attention to the fact that they're white. We can easily say I'm colorblind or race doesn't matter, but it doesn't matter to some.
Mm-hmm.
It does matter to me because I can't avoid it. We live in a system, a culture that it is so embedded, and structural racism is so embedded.
Mm-hmm.
There's never a moment of any day that I do not remember and realize and recognize that I'm a Black woman.
Yeah.
And I have to, because it does matter. It matters on how I have to operate outside of the home, how I have to teach my kids how to operate and interact. You know, we hear in the news even on how I wear my hair, right?
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
so it absolutely does matter. But but the crazy thing about that is it matters to me because I've been conditioned that it matters, because we're treated different because of it. But then we see in society that our lives don't matter as much. And so there is really not a way for me as a Black woman to ever not think about my Blackness, because that's the way that I have to operate. So I think that would be the first thing I would want to say, is recognizing that our experiences are really so polar opposite when it comes to that, that's something that I can never not think about. But I think more importantly is that although you may not see or experience what I do, or what people of color say they experience, just because you don't see it or doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And
Exactly,
so
yeah.
I wish there would be a world where I say I wasn't treated A, B, C, and D. So if I'm saying it, that means it exists, and it doesn't just exist for me. I think that's, so I think not diminishing our experiences because you're not aware, because you haven't been experienced. I think that would be one key important thing. I think the second thing is that when I say that, that's not necessarily directed to you. It's not this. I think we look at racism as I'm not a racist as a person, but that doesn't mean that the structural system does not exist. That really affects everything.
Exactly.
Financially, it affects our judicial system. It affects our healthcare system. So we have to start not looking at it solely from a personal lens and saying I am not doing A, B, C, and D, but recognizing what systems are set up that impact others, benefit others, and don't benefit some others. And I think that's the key point, is to look at the whole picture versus just that personal lens, but being open to say, if these people are saying that this is happening to them, I should listen to it. And I always equate this back, for me personally, is and it's okay to not know. I think I don't expect you to know what my experiences are. You're not living my experiences. And I go through that even when I think about with my daughter who's in a wheelchair. I did not look at what that looked like for a person sitting in a wheelchair until she's in a wheelchair.
Right.
So as I start to try to look and observe for her lens, she gets in an elevator and now people are twisting and turning and their book bags are hitting her in the face. Oh, wait a minute. They're not doing it intentionally. No. They're just not aware of that space because that's not their lived space.
Yeah.
So as we start to see these things and observe them, just be more mindful.
Thank you for that. And I hope I encounter more people like you who will tell it to me like it is. Because while I am only one, the more I can change, the more hopefully I can have some kind of impact on the rest of the society who thinks it's white. And who really doesn't understand race and othering the way I wish it would.
Yeah, but these conversations are what's going to help us get us there. Because if we don't take the time to learn one another's experiences, learn one another's cultures and backgrounds, to understand why we do what we do, why we feel what we do, we're never going to find that common place. And so that is why these conversations are so important.
And I don't know if you have an answer to that, but I know that when I am sometimes with other colleagues who identify as white, and they're saying, I don't know what to do, I just feel like I have privilege that I haven't earned, and I don't know how to get rid of it. I don't know how to do something different. I don't know how to make it different for somebody else. Is there something more than just seeking out and listening that you would advise?
So one, I don't think there's anything you can do to get rid of the privilege that you have. It's ingrained in our society the way that it is. But where I do think there's an opportunity is acknowledgement. I'll give you an example. I've been listening to a couple of presentations that our Child Health Advocacy Institute has done, and as they begin every single presentation, they make an acknowledgement of the land. Acknowledgement that the land that we are in right now, that the land of Washington, D.C., is land that was lived on by our indigenous here, and that we have taken that from them. And so we're acknowledging that. We can't, not saying that we can change that, but we're acknowledging that. But I think where there is opportunity is the acknowledgement. But I also think is that when there's opportunity, when you see something that's not right, that you have the opportunity to speak up. If there's opportunities to give back, if there's opportunities to educate, there's opportunities to communicate, to more, depending on the topic, but even to advocate to change laws. So I think those are where there are opportunities, but more importantly, just the everyday interactions of recognizing people for being people.
Thank you, Darcel. I really, really appreciate your honesty and your willingness to be honest. Just before we leave, is there anything particular around the DEI initiative that you have great hopes for in the future?
So there's so many things going on that are exciting. I encourage anyone who's interested in doing this work or learning more about the work, please get involved. I think Dr. Cora Bramble is always seeking individuals who want to help and to participate to do so, because that's what we need. We need people who are interested in doing the work to do the work. I also am hopeful that we take the conversations. I think, as I mentioned, there's so many areas of diversity that there's no way it should ever end, right? We can talk about race, we can talk about religion, physical disabilities, LGBTQ, all of the above. So I don't think that the work ever stops. And so that is what I hope, that it's one continual work, continually growing to improve the work, because there's always going to be opportunities for improvement. And we don't look at this as a now project. We look at this as something that is essential for all of us to do always.
Right. Not just a project motivated by trauma and tragedy, but something that is right to do because it is right to do.
Absolutely.
All right. I thank you so much, and I'm sure we're going to ask you back for more in the future.
Thank you so much.
All
I
right.
appreciate it.
Thank you all so very much.